The door exploded open in a violent spray of splinters and debris. Everyone was silent, and for the most part, the room itself appeared empty. Marcus held his breath, and he balled his fists tightly, waiting for something to go amiss. It was bound to happen. Fear soaked the air like mist. And when such unease was so concentrated, someone was bound to fuck up. Armor-clad hobos stepped into the room with heavy shields raised. They scanned the room with their eyes, and they took cautious steps. Most of the hobos were human, although several other exotic races made up their ranks here and there. There were a couple elves, an orc, and a blue-skinned female among the shield-bearers. A massive cut opened one of the hobos' necks, and the man screamed. Another hobo's body peeled in two, going from the left shoulder to the right rib. Annoyance flared behind Marcus's eye. Had they only waited a little longer?
Ah! Invisible monsters!
They bunched themselves together, placing their shields in front of them like a shell. No sooner than they did, the sounds of metal clanging against their defenses rang out. Marcus stepped back and then whispered to Avery, wherever they were.
This is going to get really bad. We're going to be overwhelmed. I need you to go and warn the others.
Someone whimpered a little, but from the sounds of it, it was a larger, broodier male. Avery whispered back in his ear.
But if I leave, the invisibility spell will disappear.
A shrill female voice screamed out.
Invisibility purge!
A foamy kind of energy wave blasted out through the room, and Marcus's fur and skin tingled. In an instant, everyone became visible.
Surge forward!
Others repeated his cry. The shield hobos pushed back against the monsters, while others with long spears jutted their weapons out through the cracks. Monsters roared as they became impaled. Some tried to wriggle away, but more spears stabbed them in vital spots. As soon as the initial thrusting was over, the shield hobos made an opening. More hobos armed with axes, swords, and staves ran into the fray. Marcus stepped up and engaged a young woman using an axe. She was fairly beefy for a human female, and she had tattoos covering her exposed arms. Marcus blocked the might of the axe with his chain bracers, and then kicked her in the face. Glittery metal shards covered her cheeks, and blood started to pour out. She didn't care, but instead she pushed forward. Other monsters stood beside Marcus while hobos jumped to meet them. The woman that Marcus fought relied too much on savage strikes, and perhaps hoped for one good clean hit to stun her opponent, long enough for her to deliver a killing blow. She stepped back a few paces when Marcus jumped up and kicked her in the jaw. The woman spit, and a few teeth flew out onto the floor. Marcus spun around and delivered a sidekick to the woman's stomach. When she bent over, he picked her up. A moment later, she soared into some of her other comrades across the room. A slender man with a long chained weapon swung at Marcus. He merely grabbed the chain, pulled the man closer, and kicked him in the throat. He gurgled only once before falling to the ground. Marcus grabbed the chain and started smacking other hobos with it. Each time he did, it distracted them long enough for his allies to pierce or cut them open.
Enough of this, foul creature!
A small dwarf-like man said. He pointed his hands and uttered an incantation. The chains of the weapon glowed with a bright orange light, and Marcus tossed it down. At the same moment, a vicious-looking hobo with a snaggle tooth stepped up to him with a long sword. Marcus stepped back and started blocking again, and the man drove him backwards. As he moved, he noticed the dead bodies of his comrades scattered among the hobo corpses. Half of the room's occupants had been slain, and the other half kept closer to the exit of the room.
Run!
Of the 6 that remained, 2 fled through the door. Avery flew about and waved to their hands. Illusionary images appeared beside Marcus, and the hobos started swinging at them. Naturally, the illusions dodged and countered, missing as well. Marcus shifted out of the way with the longsword, and then punched the man hard in the face. The hobo crumpled for a moment, but then tried to slice at Marcus with an overhead strike. Marcus blocked it and then jumped up. Both of his hooves slammed into the man's face. When the hobo fell back this time, he didn't get back up. An archer from across the room stared up into the air, and an arrow was knocked back. Bitter sourness festered in Marcus's stomachs. He jumped as the arrow left the bow, and he slapped his hand at it. As his hand moved through the air, his nerve endings screamed out. If he missed... A surge of pain ignited in his palm, but despite that, Marcus grinned. He turned his hand over and examined the long piece of wood that jutted from either side.
Marcus!
Avery flew down beside him.
You saved me.
Marcus broke both sides of the arrow shaft and then pulled the remaining piece out.
Get out of here, now!
Rather than argue further, the pixie flew out through the door. More hobos swelled into the room, and they advanced together slowly, shields in front of them. Marcus stood beside two other comrades. One of them was named Welshie, and he had red plaid-colored skin, with scarves with blades at the ends of them hanging out from openings in his arms and legs. The other monster's name was Franny. Franny wore a black and white maid uniform, complete with a hat and apron. The front of her apron was covered in blood and gore. For the most part, she looked human, but she had bark-like skin, painted to look like actual human flesh. Her eyes were hollowed, with only green fiery balls serving as pupils. Green fire emerged from her well-manicured nails. Up till this point, Franny stayed in the back and guarded the door. She pushed her hands forward, and a wall of green fire arose between them and the hobos. Arrows shot forward, and she waved her hands. Emerald flames burned the projectiles before they could get to her. One of the hobos jumped through the fire, and a plaid-colored scarf zipped forward across the room. The blades bit into the man's face, and the scarf retracted back. More hobos jumped through the fire, and Marcus stormed up to them. The heat from the fire baked his face a little, but he didn't care. At the moment, he and his comrades had to buy time. His hooves and fists sailed forward, stopping hobos in their tracks. The green fire licked their armor, and the heat no doubt melted into their skin through the metal. Marcus kept them in place, and they writhed in pain long enough for Marcus to knock them back into the wall, or for Welshie to dig into their faces with his scarf blades. A hobo landed beside Marcus, but a long tongue of green fire incinerated him. He screamed, fell to the ground, and then grew silent. Marcus fell back away from the fire and held his ground. The hobos stopped advancing, but they collected in a long line on the other side. The fire glimmered in their eyes.
Oh, this is bad.
True, but we're doing what we can.
The flames died down instantly. One of the hobo mages held up her staff, and a pulsating light danced around its headpiece.
Fireproof!
The front line of hobos all glowed with a bright red aura.
Well, that sucks. So, perhaps we should run.
Sounds good to me.
As they moved toward the door, an arrow shot forth and caught Franny in the side of the chest. She stopped and leaned against the wall. When Marcus tried to grab her, she waved a hand at him. Her words were breathless.
Go! I'll hold them off as long as I can.
But
Franny stepped past him, and her entire body became engulfed in green fire. Her hands kept rushing forward over and over, and numerous fireballs cascaded toward the hobos. The shield warriors raised their shields, but more than a few of the fireballs moved over their heads to the unprotected people in the back. Welshie grabbed Marcus's arms, and they left through the door. The constant whooshing of magic fire carried on the air like a festival party. When they got halfway down the hall, they stopped. The two monsters who had fled, whose names were Cal and Oliver, banged on the closed door. Cal was a big furry creature with 3 eyes, 8 fingers on each hand, and 3 toes on each foot. Oliver was a living felt puppet who had been wielding daggers earlier, but they were not in sight at the moment. Oliver had purple felt hair, orange felt skin, and a pair of dead-looking googly eyes. Avery floated above them.
Let us in! Please! They're almost here!
No answer. No response. Nothing. Avery floated down beside Marcus.
What are we going to do?
Quick!
Marcus stared at the room they had just emerged from. The sounds of whooshing still continued for the moment, but they had gotten faster and more frantic.
Can you turn yourself invisible? Not us, just you.
The 2 coward monsters whirled around to face Marcus.
What are you saying? Why not us?
Marcus didn't turn his attention from the door. The whooshing abruptly stopped, and a grim silence befell them. He swallowed hard and swirled spit against his dry throat and tongue.
Can you?
Yes, but why?
Save yourself. Don't come out of invisibility no matter what. The rest of us are going to die. You risked yourself to try and help, and you can slip past them and warn the others.
Felt tears fell from Oliver's dead eyes.
No! You had better not do that, or I'm going to tell the whole...
Marcus sidekicked him in the face, and Oliver went down. Felt eyelids fell over his googly eyes.
Do it now!
Marcus stepped closer down the hall and took steady breaths. Avery faded from view and grew silent. Cal just kept on banging on the door, begging to be let in. After several more pointless taps, Cal said,
This isn't fair!
The hobos came into the hallway, led by the shield warriors, and the long spears jutted from the cracks in the shields.
Not fair? How is it not fair? What did you think this job was? Fighting hobos is in the job description.
Cal hung his head low.
I just wanted a cushy gig. I didn't think we'd have to go through something like this.
Welshie scoffed.
If that's the way you feel, then you're in the wrong profession, buddy.
Agreed.
He tried to make a fist with his wounded hand, but the pain engulfed him. Despite that, he took on a martial arts stance.
Let's finish strong.
Marcus looked at Welshie.
You ready?
Welshie smiled grimly.
Why not? It was good to fight with you.
Same.
Marcus ran toward the shield wall. The hobos braced themselves and spears angled toward him. Right before he collided with them, a long scarf looped around, like a fabric tentacle, and batted them out of the way. Marcus landed right beside the shield wall and pushed 2 of the hobos out of the way. They didn't go very far, as they had people behind them, but it certainly upset the defenses for the moment. Blades and axes came toward him, and he blocked them, bobbed and weaved. A spear pierced his thigh, and a sword dug into his stomach. Marcus roared and grabbed a hobo by the throat. He lifted them and then broke their neck in his mighty grip. He kicked out when he could and twirled about. Hobos fell back onto their comrades, and it gave Marcus enough space to kick several of the hobos in their chests, faces, and necks. Long scarves zipped forward, and the blades bit into the exposed flesh of the hobos as well. Sometimes it was just an arm, and other times it was the throat. Bodies fell to the ground. Marcus pushed the group more, and he punched as many people as he could. A spear stabbed him in the lower back, and he nearly fell. Hobos moved past him toward the other 2. Marcus couldn't stop them. A thick chain wrapped around one of his wrists, and it held him in place. He kicked out, and then forced his way free of the chain. However, in the attempt, someone stabbed him in the chest. Marcus paused for a moment, and he roared again. Pain engulfed every nerve, and Hobos kept stabbing his lower body, over and over and over. His strength started to fade, and he slumped a little. He turned back toward his two comrades. Well, his comrade and the coward. Welshie was currently choking one of the hobos with a pair of scarves, but his face had been cleaved open. The light was almost gone from his eyes. At the moment, Welshie was operating on adrenaline alone. Cal still banged on the door, but he stopped when a hobo drove a great axe into his spine. Marcus fell to a knee, but he punched another hobo in the face. The blow only made the man step back once. When the hobo looked back at Marcus, he smiled darkly. Breathing became hard, and Marcus's movements were slower and harder to pull off. The hobos stopped stabbing at Marcus, and they allowed him to fall to the ground. He landed in a pool of thick blood, and some of it even coated his tongue. The taste was pretty awful. When he tried to push himself up, a metal boot pressed down on his shoulder. Marcus looked up to the woman with thick mascara, piercing gray eyes, and a face that made potatoes attractive.
Die, you foul thing.
She raised her sword high. The blade came down right onto his good eye. The pain stopped instantly.